right, girls, we're on the third miracle. The next day was Thursday, and that, as the whole of Miss Honey's class knew, was the day in which the headmistress would take charge on the first lesson after lunch. In the morning, Miss Honey said to them, "One or two of you did not particularly enjoy the last occasion when the headmistress took the class, so let us all try to be especially careful and clever today. How are your ears, Eric, after your last encounter with Miss Trunchbull?" "She stretched them," Eric said. "My mother said she's positive they are bigger than they were." "And Rupert?" Miss Honey said, "I'm glad to see you didn't lose any of your hair after last Thursday." "My head was jolly sore afterwards," Rupert said. "And you, Nigel," Miss Honey, "do please try not to smart aleck with Miss Headmistress today. You were really quite cheeky to her last week." "I hate her," Nigel said. "Try not to make it so obvious," Miss Honey said. "It doesn't pay. She's a very strong woman. She has muscles like steel ropes." "I wish I was grown up," Nigel said. "I'd knock her flat." "I doubt you would," Miss Honey said. "No one has ever gotten the better of her yet." "But will she be testing us on in the afternoon?" a small girl asked. "Almost certainly. The 3 times tables," Miss Honey said. "That's when you're all meant to have learnt this past week. Make sure you know it." Lunch came out and went. After lunch, the class reassembled, and Miss Honey stood at the side of the room. They all sat silent, apprehensive, waiting. And then, like some giant of doom, the enormous Trunchbull strolled into the room in her green breeches and cotton smock. She went straight to her jug of water, lifted it up by the handle, and peered inside. "I'm so glad to see," she said, "that there are no slimy creatures in my drinking water this time. If there had been, then something exceptionally unpleasant would have happened to every single member of this class, and that includes you, Miss Honey." The class remained silent and very tense. They had learned a bit about this tigress by now, and nobody was about to take any chances. "Very well," boomed the Trunchbull. "Let us see how well you know your 3 times tables. Or put it in another way, let us see how badly Miss Honey has taught you the 3 times tables." The Trunchbull was standing in front of the class, legs apart, hands on her hips, scowling at Miss Honey, who stood silently to one side. Matilda, sitting motionless at her desk in the second row, was watching things very closely. "You," the Trunchbull shouted, pointing a finger the size of a rolling pin at a boy called Wilford. Wilford was on the extreme right of the front row. "Stand up, you," she shouted at him. Wilford stood up. "Recite the 3 timetables backwards," the Trunchbull barked. "Backwards?" stammered Wilford. "But I haven't learnt it backwards." "There you are," cried the Trunchbull. Triumph. "She's taught you nothing. Miss Honey, why have you taught them absolutely nothing at all in this last week?" "That is not true, Headmistress," Miss Honey said. "They all have learnt their 3 times tables. But I see no point in teaching it to them backwards. There is a little point in teaching anything backwards. The whole object of life, Headmistress, is to go forwards. I venture to ask whether you, even for example, can spell a simple word like wrong backwards, straight away." "I very much doubt it." "Don't you impertinent me with this," Miss Honey said. "Miss Honey," the Trunchbull snapped. Then she turned back to an unfortunate Wilford. "Very well, boys," she said. "Answer me this. I have 7 apples, 7 oranges, and 7 bananas. How many pieces of fruit do I have altogether? Hurry up. Get on with it. Give me the answer." "That's adding up," Wilford cried. "That isn't the 3 times tables." "You blithering idiot," shouted the Trunchbull. "You festering gumboil. You flea-bitten fungus. That is the 3 times table. You have 3 separate lots of fruit, and each lot has 7 pieces. 3 7s are 21. Can't you see, you stagnant cesspool? I'll give you one more chance. I have 8 coconuts and 8 monkey nuts and 8 nutty little idiots like you. How many nuts do I have altogether? Answer me, quickly." Poor Wilford was properly flustered. "Wait," he cried. "Please wait, I've got to add it up. 8 coconuts and 8 monkey nuts," and he started counting on his fingers. You blustering blister," yelled the Trunchbull. "You moth-eaten maggot. This is not adding up. This is multiplication. The answer is 3 8s. Or is it 8 3s? What is the difference between 3 8s and 8 3s? Tell me that, you mangled little wurzel, and look sharp about it." By now, Wilfred was so frightened and bewildered even to speak. In 2 strides, the Trunchbull was beside him, and by some amazing gymnastic trick, it might have been judo or karate, she flipped the back of Wilfred's leg with one of her feet so that the boy shot up out of the ground and turned a somersault in the air. But halfway through the somersault, she caught him by an ankle, held him up, dangling upside down like a plucked chicken in a shop window. 8 threes, the Trunchbull shouted, swinging Wilfred from side to side by his ankle. 8 threes is the same as 3 eights, and 3 eights are 24. Repeat that. At exactly that moment, Nigel at the other end of the room jumped to his feet and started pointing exactly at the blackboard and screaming, "The chalk! The chalk! Look at the chalk! It's moving all on its own!" So hysterical and shrill was Nigel's scream that everyone in the place, including the Trunchbull, looked up at the blackboard. And sure enough, a brand new piece of chalk was hovering near the gray-black writing surface of the blackboard. Who could it be? "It's writing something," screamed Nigel. "The chalk is writing something," and indeed it was. What the blazes is that?" yelled the Trunchbull. It had shaken her to see her first name being written like that with an invisible hand. She dropped Wilfred to the floor. Then she yelled at nobody in particular. "Who's doing this? Who's writing it?" The chalk continued to write. Everyone in the place heard the gasp that came from the Trunchbull's throat. "No!" she cried. "It can't be! It can't be Magnus!" "It is Magnus, and you'd better believe it." That's what the chalkboard said. Miss Honey, at the side of the room, glanced swiftly at Matilda. The child was sitting very straight at her desk, the head held high, the mouth compressed, the eyes glittered like 2 stars. "Agatha, give my Jenny back her house." The chalkboard with the chalk the chalk wrote on the chalkboard. For some reason, everyone now looked at the Trunchbull. The woman's face had turned white as snow, and her mouth was opening and shutting like a halibut out of water and giving out a series of strangled gasps. "Give me my Jenny. Give my Jenny her wages. Give my Jenny the house. Then get out of here. If you don't, I'll come and get you. I will come and get you like you got me. I'm watching you, Agatha." That's Miss Trunchbull's first name. The chalk stopped writing. It hovered for a few moments. Then suddenly it dropped to the floor and a tinkle and broke in 2. Wilfred, who had managed to resume his seat in the front row, screamed, "Miss Trunchbull has fallen down! Miss Trunchbull is on the floor!" This was the most sensational bit of news of all. The entire class jumped out of their seats to have a really good look. And there she was, the huge figure of the headmistress, stretched full length to her back across the floor, out on the couch. Miss Honey ran forward and knelt beside the giant. "She's fainted," she cried. "She's out cold. Someone go fetch the matron at once." 3 children ran out of the room. Nigel, always ready for action, leaped up and seized the big jug of water. "My father says cold water is the best way to wake someone up who's fainted," he said, and with that he tipped the entire contents of the jug over the Trunchbull's head. No one, not even Miss Honey, protested. As for Matilda, she continued to sit motionless at her desk. She was feeling curiously elated. She felt as though she had touched something that was not quite of this world, the highest point of the heavens, the farthest star. She had felt most wonderfully the power surging up behind her eyes, gushing like warm fluid inside her skull. Her eyes had become scorching hot, hotter than before, and things came out, bursting out of her eye sockets, and then one piece of chalk had lifted itself and began to write. It seemed as though she had hardly done anything. It had all been so simple. The school matron, followed by five teachers, 3 women, and 2 men, came rushing into the room. "By golly, somebody's floored her at last," cried one of the men, grinning. "Congratulations, Miss Honey." "Who threw the water over her?" asked the matron. "I did," Nigel said proudly. "Good for you," another teacher said. "Shall we get some more?" "Stop that," the matron said. "We must carry her out to the sick room." It took all 5 teachers and the matron to lift the enormous woman and stagger her out of the room. Miss Honey said to the class, "I think you'd all better go to the playground and amuse yourselves until the next lesson. Then she turned and walked over to the blackboard and carefully wiped out the chalk writing. The children began to file out of the classroom. Matilda starting to go out, but as she passed Miss Honey, she paused, and her twinkling eyes met the teacher's eyes, and Miss Honey ran forward and gave the tiny child a great big hug and a kiss. Ooh, I wonder what's the next chapter.